I didn't cancel a $2.4 billion contract out of anger. I activated a clause. There's a difference. The wine wasn't spilled. It was delivered. The Halberg Infrastructure Gala was about 30 minutes in when Evelyn Halberg stepped directly into my path. The ballroom shimmered with glass and gold. Nearly 300 donors, analysts, regional officials and board members moved through the room like satellites orbiting a single family name. Evelyn looked at my jacket first, then my guest badge, then my face. VIP seating is reserved, she said. I know, I replied calmly. Catering access is through the side corridor. I'm not catering. She offered a thin, polite smile. Then you're lost. I'm exactly where I need to be. She paused for a moment. Not confusion, calculation. She saw a woman standing in a place where she believed only power belonged. Evelyn reached for a passing tray, lifted a glass of red wine and slowly tilted it over my chest. The pour was deliberate. Not rage. Not an accident. Classification. A few guests gasped. Someone laughed a little too quickly. One director stared down at his phone as if ignoring it might erase the moment. Across the room the incoming CEO Daniel Rains noticed. And did nothing. I didn't move. I didn't wipe the stain. I let the room see it. As the wine soaked into the silk of my blouse, one thought crossed my mind. She hadn't insulted me. She had sorted me. Grant Halberg appeared seconds later, smiling until he noticed my jacket. What happened here? He asked. I met his eyes. Hospitality, I said evenly. And I wondered something else. This is how they treat a stranger in public. How do they price risk in private? Cross Meridian Capital hadn't wired $1 yet. That part mattered. The commitment on paper was $2.4 billion. Structured, staged, performance-based. 6 years of infrastructure modernization. The press releases had already been drafted. But signatures don't move money. Authorization does. And final authorization required me in the room. I never deploy capital early. I never deploy remotely. And I never deploy based on reputation alone. Section 14.2 sits halfway through the agreement. Reputational conduct during negotiation or closing that materially impacts standing may trigger immediate capital withdrawal. It doesn't sound dramatic when you read it aloud. It isn't meant to. 2 years ago I ignored a smaller signal. A chairman mocking a line employee during a town hall. I dismissed it as personality and closed the deal anyway. It cost us 9 months of damage control, 3 institutional partners, and a slow erosion of trust no performance metric could repair. Arrogance compounds faster than interest. I learned that lesson well. By the time I left the gala, the wine had dried into a darker stain on the silk. The footage had already been archived. Later that night my phone lit up. Daniel Rains. Sorry about earlier. That wasn't ideal. I watched the typing indicator appear, disappear, appear again. I replied with 2 words. Useful information. Because that's what it was. Not humiliation. Not emotion. Data. I don't deploy capital into a culture I haven't measured. The question wasn't whether I had been insulted. The question was whether I had just measured something expensive. The next morning, cameras were already live when I walked into the boardroom. 3 angles. Red indicator lights. Internal stream investor archive legal record. Transparency, they called it. Grant Halberg stood at the head of the table. Today marks a historic transition, he began smoothly. Halberg Infrastructure enters its next phase of disciplined growth. Disciplined. I waited until the first slide finished. Then I spoke. We need to address last night. The room shifted slightly. Grant didn't look at me immediately. A social misunderstanding, he said, adjusting his cuff. Nothing more. Paul, the CFO, lowered his eyes to the binder in front of him. He didn't turn a page. He didn't need to. Daniel leaned forward. Is this material to funding? He asked carefully. Grant answered before I could. No. I didn't correct him. Not yet. A director 2 seats down opened the agreement binder. Section 14.2, he read aloud. Reputational conduct during negotiation or closing that materially impacts standing may trigger capital withdrawal. The room tightened by half a degree. Grant laughed softly. Boilerplate. Paul spoke quietly. It was revised at their request. Silence. Several heads turned toward me. I didn't move. I didn't confirm. Grant leaned back, confidence settling in again. We're not jeopardizing a $2.4 billion partnership over optics. Optics. I watched him minimize it. Watched him repeat it. Watched him do it on camera. I had not yet clarified my authority. Sometimes you don't interrupt a man while he's digging. You measure the depth. Finally, Daniel asked the question. Marcus, what exactly is your role in final authorization? He asked it carefully. Grant answered for me. She's here representing the capital partner. Representing. I let the word sit in the air. Then I corrected him. I don't represent the capital partner. Silence. I am the managing partner authorized to release the entire commitment. The recalculation around the table was immediate. Not dramatic. Mathematical. Paul closed his binder. She is the sole signatory on the primary tranche, he confirmed quietly. No one mentioned Evelyn. She wasn't in the room. But everyone understood. Grant adjusted his posture. Then let's move forward constructively, he said. Constructive requires acknowledgement, I replied. He held my gaze. For what exactly? You didn't embarrass a guest, I said calmly. You tested a covenant. That landed harder than he expected. Daniel exhaled slowly. Grant leaned back again, reclaiming composure. We are not turning a minor social incident into structural instability. Minor. The cameras were still recording. So was I. I hadn't activated the clause yet. No phone call. No announcement. Just a room full of powerful people realizing, at different speeds, that the woman they had categorized the night before controlled whether $2.4 billion ever moved. The tension had peaked. But nothing had happened. Yet. Not yet. The question was no longer about authority. It was about acknowledgement. Was it coming? Or was this about to escalate? Grant folded his hands on the table as if the gesture alone settled the matter. We are not destabilizing a $2.4 billion partnership over something trivial. Trivial. Daniel shifted in his chair. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He looked at me, then back at Grant. It may not be trivial, he said carefully. Perception. Grant cut him off. It was a social error. Nothing more. Daniel fell silent. That told me more than anything he might have said. Intent isn't the clause trigger, I said calmly. Impact is. Grant shook his head once. You're overpricing a social error. No, I replied evenly. I'm pricing a governance risk. Across the table, Paul's phone lit up briefly. He glanced down, pre-market indicators already reacting to early chatter. Markets are sensitive to uncertainty. More sensitive to culture than most executives like to admit. Grant either didn't notice or chose not to. I placed my phone face up on the table. Not as a threat. As clarity. No one spoke. The cameras were still live. I gave them one final opening. Tell me why I should believe this won't happen again, I said quietly. When the cameras are off. Silence settled in layers. Grant leaned back. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No acknowledgement. No correction. No accountability. I turned to Daniel. He held my gaze for half a second, then looked down at the table. That was the moment. Not the wine. Not the clause. The silence. I reached for my phone. If no one in this room is willing to draw the line, I said slowly, then I will. Still no one answered. Grant adjusted his tie. We are not issuing a public apology over this. There's nothing to apologize for. Minimize. Reframe. Control the narrative. That footage can be contextualized, he continued. We can clarify intent. Intent. He was still arguing motive. The clause never mentioned motive. I waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Then I picked up my phone. Activate section 14.2. My voice wasn't raised. It wasn't sharp. Just precise. Across the table, Paul's posture changed before anyone else reacted. He already understood what that sentence meant operationally. Grant let out a short laugh. You're posturing. I didn't look at him. I don't posture, I said. I document. On the other end of the line, my general counsel confirmed receipt. Formal notice drafted. Immediate suspension of capital commitment pending review. Effective immediately, I added. I ended the call. No slammed phone. No dramatics. Just quiet. For a moment nothing happened. The room inhaled and held it. Grant leaned back, folding his arms. You're not going to tank a $2.4 billion structure over optics. Paul's phone buzzed. He didn't need to check it. He already knew. The primary tranche had been suspended. Grant still believed this could be contained. Still believed authority lived at the head of the table. The cameras were still recording. And the capital was no longer committed. The question now was simple. How long does it take for $2.4 billion to disappear? 2 minutes. That was all it took. Paul's phone vibrated first. A short, contained sound against polished wood. He glanced down. Primary tranche suspended. Grant noticed the movement. That's procedural, he said quickly. Temporary. Paul didn't respond. A second vibration. Longer. He checked again. Withdrawal notice executed. The color drained from his face before the words even reached the rest of us. Around the table, other phones began to light up. Then 3. Then nearly all of them. Assistants texting. Legal calling. Investor relations asking for clarification that did not exist. Behind Grant, the wall-mounted screen refreshed. Pre-market indicators shifting. -7%. Pause. -10%. No one spoke. Daniel leaned toward me, his voice low. Is there still a path to reverse this? I kept my eyes on the screen. Clauses don't include regret. Grant stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. The lead independent director didn't move. No, he said calmly. Governance discussion required. Grant stared at him. You can't be serious. The director folded his hands. We are past optics. The cameras were still live, red lights blinking. What had started as transparency now looked like exposure. Grant's authority hadn't vanished. But it had fractured. Phones continued vibrating around the table. The quiet kind of panic, the expensive kind, settled into the room. No shouting. No theatrics. Just consequence. The capital was gone. The market was reacting. And the board had a decision to make. Protect the chairman. Or protect the company. Grant regained his voice before he regained control. This is investor activism overreach, he said sharply. A disproportionate response designed to intimidate leadership. No one nodded. Paul spoke without lifting his eyes. The clause conditions were met. Grant turned toward him. You're agreeing with this? I'm stating fact. Another director opened the agreement binder again, this time slowly. Section 14.2, he read aloud. Documented conduct during negotiation or closing that materially impacts reputational standing may trigger immediate withdrawal. He paused. No intent requirement, he added quietly. Impact is sufficient. The room felt smaller. Daniel straightened in his chair. This is bigger than optics, he said, voice tight. We were warned. Grant snapped before he could stop himself. Stay in your lane, Daniel. That did it. The shift around the table was subtle, but irreversible. One director looked at another. A silent exchange. The lead independent director cleared his throat. We need an executive session. Grant's jaw tightened. I am the chair. The response came evenly. Not if we vote otherwise. Silence. No one moved. The cameras were still running. Grant scanned the table, searching for loyalty. What he found instead was calculation. The market was down double digits. The capital had been withdrawn. And the footage from the night before was now contextualized in real time. This was no longer about a social mistake. It was about leadership risk. Grant Halberg had lost control of the narrative. The question had become sharper now. Would the board sacrifice stability, or sacrifice him? The lead independent director requested an extraordinary session. The cameras remained on. No one reached to turn them off. The motion was introduced quietly without drama. Administrative leave for the board chair pending a governance review. Grant laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. You're reacting to market noise, he said. This is panic. No one answered. A director to his left hesitated before raising his hand. Another kept his hand down, an abstention. That detail mattered. This wasn't a unanimous moral stand. It was calculation. The votes were counted. The motion passed by a narrow margin. Grant's authority didn't collapse all at once. It narrowed first, then snapped. Daniel's pending appointment as CEO was placed on hold pending review. On the screens behind them, the market numbers refreshed again. Down 14%. The figure appeared on 3 monitors almost at the same time. Grant looked across the table at me. "You've destabilized us." I met his gaze. "You destabilized yourself." No one flinched. No one objected. There was no shouting. No dramatic exit. No security escort. Just language. Procedure. Removal. The cameras captured the transfer of authority in real time. Grant remained seated for a moment longer, as if refusing to stand might preserve something intangible. It didn't. Companies don't implode when leverage disappears. They compress. They recalculate. They expose the fault lines that were already there. Now the chair was vacant. The capital was gone. The board was fractured. The question was no longer cultural. It was structural. What does a company look like when leverage evaporates? The market opened at 9:30 a.m. By 9:42, the decline was no longer speculative. By the closing bell, the stock was down 17%. Not a collapse. Compression. Analysts moved quickly. Governance instability. Leadership credibility risk. Investor withdrawal linked to cultural miscalculation. Credit agencies placed the company under review within hours. Institutional investors paused secondary commitments. Banking partners requested updated exposure models. The capital vacuum wasn't loud. It was measurable. I didn't celebrate. There's nothing satisfying about structural correction. Only necessary. Late that afternoon, my phone lit up again. A message from Daniel. I should have said something. I read it twice before replying. He had the microphone. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then nothing. Silence is rarely neutral. In boardrooms, it aligns with power. In markets, it prices risk. In culture, it signals tolerance. The cameras had been on. The claws had been clear. The numbers had moved. What hadn't moved was accountability until it was forced. The company would survive. Most do. But leverage had shifted. Authority had been recalibrated. And the cost was visible on every financial screen in the country. The question lingered longer than the decline itself. Is silence cheaper, or more expensive? 3 weeks later, Grant asked to meet. No cameras. No board members. No blinking red recording lights. Just a conference room overlooking a slow-moving river. Grant arrived alone. No counsel. No assistant. He didn't sit at the head of the table. That detail didn't escape me. "You could have warned me," he said. "I did," I replied. When she lifted the glass. He exhaled slowly through his nose. That was a social error. It was a governance event. He looked at me like I had translated something he preferred to keep abstract. "You really believe a moment like that justifies structural damage?" "I believe moments like that reveal structural risk." He didn't argue immediately. Instead, he adjusted his cuff. A small habit of control through movement. Finally, he asked the question that mattered. "Will the capital return?" My answer wasn't sharp. But it was final. "Not under your chairmanship." My words were final. Grant leaned back in his chair and stared out the window for several long seconds. This wasn't about an apology anymore. It wasn't about public relations. It was about structure. He understood that now. The board had placed him on administrative leave pending review. Technically, he was still the chairman. Functionally, he wasn't. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "The market did." He didn't look defeated. Just recalibrated. Arrogance doesn't disappear when it's challenged. It either restructures itself, or it gets removed. We both stood. The room stayed quiet. No handshake. No hostility. Just consequence. The real question wasn't personal. What costs more, arrogance or removal? It had never really been about the wine. Wine evaporates. Stains fade. Footage gets archived. What remains is classification. Who belongs? Who doesn't? Who is assumed powerful? Who is assumed decorative? That night, she saw a woman standing in a place she believed only power belonged. So she acted accordingly. The board acted accordingly. The market acted accordingly. Sorting is rarely loud. It's quiet, reflexive, cultural. It happens in glances, in pauses, in laughter that arrives too quickly, and in silence. Silence is the most expensive form of agreement. The clause didn't punish an insult. It enforced structure. Capital isn't emotional. It doesn't bruise. It reallocates. She thought she had sorted me. Instead she sorted her board. Her company. Her leverage. The moment the glass tilted, the outcome was already in motion. Not because I was offended, but as I was observing. If you humiliate someone you assume is powerless, eventually you humiliate your shareholders. Capital doesn't tolerate that. Markets don't debate dignity. They price it. Governance isn't about avoiding embarrassment. It's about preventing predictable risk. What happened in that ballroom was predictable. What happened in the boardroom was procedural. What happened in the market was mathematical. There was no revenge. No spectacle. Only consequence. She thought it was a glass of wine. It was priced at $2.4 billion.